It is 3 o'clock in the morning on the Costa del Sol. The air is thick, humid and silent. In the driveway of a multi-million euro villa in Benalmádena, shadows are moving. These are not burglars. They are elite officers from the Spanish Guardia Civil, heavily armed, wearing balaclavas, their fingers resting on the triggers of assault rifles. They have been waiting for this moment for years. Inside the house sleeps a man who looks like a typical British expat. He is middle-aged, slightly overweight, unassuming. He looks like a man who might run a used car dealership or manage a pub in the Midlands. But Robert Dawes is not a pub landlord. He is the single most powerful criminal ever to emerge from the United Kingdom. He is a ghost, a phantom, who has flooded Europe with cocaine, heroin and violence for 2 decades. For years, police forces across 5 countries have tried to touch him, and for years they have failed. He does not touch the drugs. He does not touch the money. He operates in the shadows, communicating through military-grade encryption, protected by layers of fear and loyalty. But even ghosts make mistakes. And Robert Dawes, the man who believed he was untouchable, the man who thought he was smarter than the National Crime Agency, smarter than Interpol, and smarter than the cartels, has just made the only mistake that matters. He picked up a phone, and he said 4 words that signed his own death warrant. Tonight, the door comes down. Tonight, the kingpin of Nottingham falls. But to understand why this raid is happening, and to understand the sheer scale of the monster sleeping inside that villa, we have to go back to a rainy council estate in Nottinghamshire, where a young man decided that being a local tough guy wasn't enough. He wanted the world. Robert Dawes was born in Sutton, in Ashfield, a hard-nosed working-class town in Nottinghamshire. In the 1990s, the UK criminal landscape was changing. The old firms were dying out, replaced by a new breed of criminal who understood that the real money wasn't in robbing banks, but in logistics. Dawes started small. He worked the doors as a bouncer, a classic entry point for organized crime. It gave him a front-row seat to the local drug trade, and it gave him a reputation for violence. But Dawes was different from the thugs he stood next to. He wasn't just muscle. He had a brain for business. He looked at the drug trade and he didn't see packets and ounces. He saw supply chains. He saw borders, transport routes and profit margins. While his peers were fighting over street corners in Nottingham, Dawes was looking at the map of Europe. By the early 2000s, he had outgrown the Midlands. He realized that to run a true empire, he couldn't be on the ground. He needed to be untouchable. He moved to the Costa del Sol in Spain, a region so saturated with British criminals, it became known as the Costa del Crimi. From here, Dawes didn't just join the game, he reinvented it. He built a criminal corporation that functioned with the efficiency of Amazon. He wasn't a gangster anymore, he was a CEO. The scale of what Robert Dawes built is almost difficult to comprehend. Most drug dealers are customers. They buy from a bigger fish. Who buys from a bigger fish? Dawes cut out the middlemen. He went straight to the source. He forged direct alliances with the South American cartels, negotiating prices for cocaine by the tonne, not the kilo. He established ties with the Italian 'Ndrangheta, the most powerful mafia organization in the world. He worked with Dutch motorcycle gangs to handle distribution in the Low Countries. He sat at the center of a spiderweb that stretched from the jungles of Colombia to the streets of Manchester. His organization didn't just move cocaine. They moved heroin from Turkey, cannabis from Morocco, and synthetic drugs from China. And the money was astronomical. We are not talking about suitcases of cash buried in the woods, though there was plenty of that. We are talking about shipping containers full of currency. We are talking about money laundering operations that utilized global banking systems, property empires in Dubai, and shell companies in tax havens. Dawes had achieved the holy grail of the underworld. He was the invisible man. He never got his hands dirty. He sat in his villa in Spain, or his penthouse in Dubai, and he orchestrated the movement of narcotics across continents using encrypted BlackBerry phones. He believed that technology had made him invincible. He believed that as long as he never touched a brick of cocaine, the law could never touch him. But the National Crime Agency, Britain's equivalent of the FBI, had other ideas. They knew who Dawes was. They knew he was the top of the pyramid. The problem was proving it. Operation Halberd was launched, a massive international task force dedicated to bringing him down. It was a game of cat and mouse played out on a global stage. The police would seize a shipment, 300 kilos here, 500 kilos there, and they would arrest the drivers, the couriers, the low-level grunts. But the trail always went cold before it reached Dawes. He was disciplined. He used PGP, pretty good privacy, encryption software that the police, at that time, could not crack. He changed his phones constantly. He never met with people he didn't trust, and he trusted almost no one. The police were watching a man who seemed to live a life of leisure, knowing that with a few keystrokes on a secure device, he was ordering the movement of enough narcotics to destroy entire communities. The frustration in the NCA headquarters was palpable. They were watching the devil walk free, simply because he was good at paperwork. Then came the year 2013. The year the masks slipped. The year of the suitcase shipment. This was the operation that showed the sheer audacity of Robert Dawes. Most traffickers hide their product. They weld it inside the hulls of ships. They stuff it inside hollowed-out pineapples. They dissolve it in liquid. Dawes was so confident, so arrogant in his power, that he tried to walk it through the front door. On September 11th, an Air France flight from Caracas, Venezuela, touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. It was a standard commercial flight, filled with tourists and business travelers. But in the cargo hold, there were 30 suitcases that didn't belong to any passenger. When French border police opened them, they didn't find clothes or souvenirs. They found bricks of pure cocaine. 1.3 tons of it. It was the largest seizure ever made at a French airport. The street value was estimated at £200 million. This wasn't a shipment, it was a flood. The seizure made headlines around the world. It was a massive victory for law enforcement. But for the police hunting Robert Dawes, it was just another dead end. The people arrested were low-level airport corrupt officials and Venezuelan soldiers. There was no paperwork linking the suitcases to Dawes. There was no fingerprint, no DNA. It looked like he had gotten away with it again. The organization took the hit. £200 million gone. And Dawes didn't even blink. That is the measure of the man's power. He could lose a fortune that would bankrupt a small country, and treat it as a minor business expense. But inside, beneath the calm exterior, Robert Dawes was seething. It wasn't the money, it was the disrespect. It was the failure. And that anger, that bruise to his ego, would be his undoing. The investigation turned into a waiting game. The Spanish Guardia Civil, working with the NCA, intensified their surveillance on Dawes' villa in Benalmádena. They bugged his car. They tapped the phones of his associates. They waited for a slip-up. And then, it happened. Not on a secure BlackBerry, but in a luxury hotel in Madrid. Dawes was holding a meeting. He was sitting with his associates, drinking, feeling safe. The room was bugged. The Spanish police were listening in real time. The conversation turned to the Paris seizure, the lost 1.3 tons. Dawes was angry. He was ranting about the incompetence of the people involved, the loss of the product, the sheer waste of it all. And then, in a moment of hubris, a moment of pure, unfiltered arrogance, he claimed ownership. He looked at his associates and said, "Regarding the Paris shipment, I own that shit." 4 words. I own that shit. In the listening post, the officers froze. This was it. This wasn't code. This wasn't a vague allusion to the work or the gear. This was a direct admission of ownership of a 1.3-ton cocaine shipment. It was the smoking gun they had spent a decade searching for. But a recording alone isn't always enough. They needed to build the case to ensure that when they struck, he wouldn't slip away again. They spent months corroborating the evidence, linking his voice on the tape to the logistics of the shipment, mapping out the network that supported his claim. They watched as he continued to operate, gathering more intelligence, more names, more routes. They watched him feel secure, watched him play tennis, watched him eat in fine restaurants, all the while knowing they had the recording that would bury him. Finally, in November 2015, the order was given. Operation Halberd moved into its final phase. The raid on the villa was executed with military precision. When the Guardia Civil kicked down the door, Dawes was surprised, but he wasn't panicked. He had been arrested before. He had faced questions before. He assumed this was just another harassment, another 48 hours in a cell before his lawyers got him out. He sat in the interrogation room with a smug look on his face, the look of a man who knows the game better than the people asking the questions. He refused to answer. He stared at the wall. He waited for the evidence to fall apart. Then, they extradited him to France. The French judicial system is different from the British one. They held him. They kept him in isolation. And they prepared for the trial of the century. When the trial finally began in Paris, Dawes was still confident. He looked at the jury, he looked at the judge, and he denied everything. He claimed he was a legitimate businessman. He claimed the police were framing him. And then, they played the tape. The courtroom fell silent as the voice of Robert Dawes filled the air.
I own that shit.
His defense team tried to spin it. They argued that he was lying on the tape, that he was just bragging to impress other criminals, that owning it was a metaphor. It was a desperate defense, the flailing of a man who realizes the walls are closing in. The jury didn't buy it. They looked at the evidence, the scale of the operation, the money, the connections, and they saw the truth. They saw the spider. The verdict was guilty. Robert Dawes, the untouchable kingpin of Nottingham, the man who treated Europe as his personal chessboard, was sentenced to 22 years in a French prison. The sentence was a hammer blow. For a man of his age, it was effectively a life sentence. As he was led away, the arrogance finally faded, replaced by the cold reality of a concrete cell. The empire he had built, the hundreds of millions of pounds, the villas, the cars, the power, it all evaporated. He had been destroyed, not by a rival gang, not by a betrayal, but by his own voice. By his own need to claim credit for his crime. The fall of Robert Dawes left a vacuum in the European drug trade. It sent a shockwave through the underworld. It proved that no one is too big, no one is too smart, and no one is truly untouchable. It showed that the police are patient, that they will wait years, decades even, for that one single mistake. Dawes sits in a cell today, a long way from the Costa del Sol, a long way from the council estates of Sutton in Ashfield. He has plenty of time to think about that meeting in Madrid. Plenty of time to replay that conversation in his head. Plenty of time to regret the moment he decided to brag. He played the game at the highest possible level, and he almost won. But in the end, the game always wins. The streets of Nottingham are still there, the drugs still flow, but the king is gone. And the warning remains, for whoever tries to take his place, even the devil can be caught if he talks too much.